guys, Brian Zimmerman back again with CrossFit Jungle Gym. Conversation came up this morning and I want to just address it because this comes up quite often, and I think that most people have a misconception about what intensity is in exercise, in a training program. So first thing is, what does somebody normally think that intensity is? And like they go, oh, that was a really intense workout, man, it was great. Is not necessarily always the same type of intensity that we're talking about when we're actually getting results. And so intensity is very important because it's the most common trait among training programs that gets results. But it's important that we know what it is and what it isn't so that we can appropriately try and attain it. So misconceptions. The more you sweat, the more intense it was. False. Yeah, the more you sweat, the more your body's saying, hey, we need to cool you down so that you don't overheat. That's all sweat is. It has nothing to do with intensity. You could work out when it's cold out, or you could be incredibly efficient at cooling your core temperature and you don't sweat, and that's fine. But that doesn't mean you're not having an intense workout. Or the reverse of that, like just because you're sweating doesn't mean it's intense. Your heart rate. Your heart rate is going to jump for a variety of reasons, and some training programs, this is how they base intensity. Well, the heart rate is not actually the best measure of intensity, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, it's an indicator of intensity, but it's not. It's only a correlate. It's not the actual measure of intensity. Being out of breath. Just because you're out of breath doesn't mean the workout was intense. What it means is you're not getting enough oxygen to where it needs to go. And that's not necessarily intensity. It may feel intense. It may be intense emotionally or mentally, but that's not how we measure intensity. So how do we measure intensity? It's measured in foot-pounds per second. Foot-pounds per second. So the amount of load you move, the amount of distance it travels, divided by the amount of time it takes you to get there. So if you just take foot-pounds, that's distance traveled plus the amount of weight, that is work. Okay? So if I take 100 pounds and I move it 2 feet, that's 200 foot-pounds of work. Okay? If I'm not measuring time, that's just how much work has to be done. If I measure the time, now I'm measuring power. Okay? And that's how we measure intensity. It's measured in power. And if you think of a really intense workout, for example, if I tell you to move 200 pounds, across a room, let's say it's traveling 50 feet, you go, okay, that's not a problem. I'll just break it into 5-pound chunks. I'll walk back and forth a bunch of times and it'll be done. And maybe I'll take all day to do it. That is not an intense workout, but we did a bunch of work. If you now take that same amount of work and I say, finish this in 5 seconds, it's going to be a lot more intense for that 5 seconds than it was at any 1 second during that walking back and forth with 5 pounds. And this is how we measure fitness. So certain things are really easy to measure. Like for example, box jumps, you just take your weight times the height that you're jumping, break it down to feet so that you have break it down into feet and pounds and divided by the time it takes you to do. And then you're gonna get foot-pounds per second. So like frame of reference here is like 555 foot-pounds per second is a horsepower. This is like the universal measure for power. And that's exactly how we measure fitness, which is measured in power, which is how we should be measuring our intensity if we're trying to improve fitness. And if we're trying to improve fitness, then we should be measuring power. And if we're producing power, that's what intensity is. If we want to improve our intensity because that's where more results come from, we're going to get fitness. But it's not measured in how much sweat was lost, how many heartbeats you took in the last hour, or if you feel out of breath, because there's plenty of ways that you can improve your power output without ever sweating, without ever going over a moderate heart rate. Okay, and chances are that you're probably going to be out of breath, but that's not how we measure it. So, for example, in a 1 second bout of intense exercise, 1 second, imagine how much weight you have to move for that 1 second to be really, really, really intense. It's a lot. You might be out of breath for a couple seconds afterwards if it was really heavy. Your heart rate probably goes up a little bit, but it's probably not going up maximally. And you're certainly not getting a conditioning effect out of it. You're getting a strength stimulus out of that, and you're going to get a strength adaptation out of that. And so, and you're probably not going to sweat that much unless it's hot out, and it just happens to be hot out. And what you're going to get out of that is the most intense 1 second that you could possibly get. And if we continually train, at this at high intensity, what's going to happen is our body is going to learn how to produce more power. And so, like, for example, like if I'm deadlifting, that's the most power I can produce, the heaviest lift I can create, is going to give me a high intensity. And so, why do we deadlift? Because it's able to produce a very high amount of power in a short period of time. Okay? Now what I can do with that maximum amount of power is now I can start to extend it out over time. And that's why, especially like triathletes, they need to lift. They need to get stronger, because otherwise they're not going to be able to produce higher power outputs, because they never train at high intensity. Even though like running at a mile seems like it's high intensity in comparison to running 20 miles, it's still not the same high intensity that you're going to experience in a 1 second lift. And if you're not doing that sort of power lifting, you aren't going to be able to create the amount of power, the intensity that is necessary to make long-term improvements in your sport, if it is triathlons. And likewise with any other sport. If you haven't trained for high power and short duration, your longer efforts are going to be weak. On the converse side is if I only train to that high intensity, and I'm never trying to extend out that intensity measured in foot-pounds per second over 2 minutes, over 5 minutes, over 20 minutes, over an hour, then I'm also going to be lacking in fitness, and I'm going to be lacking intensity at longer duration. And that's a problem. That's a hole in my training. So I kind of, to relate back to last week's video, where we were talking about variance, like, we're just trying to increase the amount of power we can produce at 1 second, at 2 minutes, at 20 minutes, at 5 hours. We're trying to improve our intensity, and that's measurable in foot-pounds per second. We've done a couple clinics and seminars talking about how to, like, literally measuring it and putting it on a graph, but we can actually graph this sucker. But what I want you guys to think about, and think about this a little bit before you go and comment, is what movements are really intense. For if I do it for 1 second, or 1 to 5 seconds even, let's say, what lifts or movements, I should say, are really intense for 5 seconds, which ones are totally worthless if we do them for 5 seconds, which ones are really great, or maybe even a combination of them that are really great for 5 to 10 minutes, and what are some that are totally inappropriate for 20 minutes long, or are really conducive to 20-minute long workouts. Think about those sort of things, like, because I can guarantee you coaches here at CrossFit Jungle Gym have thought about it, and they're picked out for a reason. Like, they're not just randomly thrown together. People tend to think that's what CrossFit is, but it's far deeper than that. Every workout is considered for its ability to produce intensity, and that's measured in foot-pounds per second. That's 555 of those. That's 1 horsepower. We strive to be that powerful for 1 second. But anyways, that's probably a lot more than I was hoping to get into this video. But that gives you a little bit of background into what intensity is, what we're trying to achieve. It's not about sweat. It's not about heart rate. It's not about being out of breath. That's not how we measure intensity. And that's also not where results come from. Results come from real intensity measured in foot-pounds per second. Any questions about intensity, or how you should be making your workouts more intense, or what you should be doing in every workout, put them in the comments. Trying to answer all the questions you guys have in videos to come. And Rashad, thanks for encouraging me to do another one. I'm excited to do more. All right, see you guys next time.